Martin Rothenberg, age 77.
Great. So, as you know, we're here interviewing Korean War veterans for the Korean War Veteran Memorial Database. And the idea is to just have kind of a short glimpse and hear your experiences about your life for future generations and children or adults that will be doing research or just kind of interested in looking up information on the Korean War. So let's start out with getting your idea of this project, how you feel about participating in the project.
No, I feel fine. I think my experiences in Korea were very important to me, and it's nice to be able to share them.
Mm-hmm. So it is an important thing that you participate in this, I guess.
Yes. I have all these pictures and memories, and it's nice to share them with other people.
Yeah, that's great.
Well, I was a television repairman,
Mm-hmm.
and fixed television sets, and I worked in, actually I was in Florida, and then I came back to New York City, and I couldn't really continue my career because I knew I was going to be drafted. So,
why did you know that?
well, I was the right age and I was healthy.
Yeah.
So the draft was coming, so there was no chance of like starting a business or anything like that.
And what year was this?
That was in '53.
Okay. And so you ended up being drafted. And tell us about that. How did you feel about being drafted? I mean, I guess you knew it was coming, but there's a difference when it actually happens.
Yeah, well, the truce had started when I was just before I was drafted, but the fighting could always start again.
Yeah.
So I was hoping to stay in the United States,
Right.
or go to Europe, but instead they sent me to the West Coast, and I went on a troop ship and stopped at Japan, and then ended up in Busan, and then I took a train to Seoul, and each time I was going more and more closer to where the fighting could be. And then was in a 2.5-ton truck. I never knew, they don't tell you where you're going.
Yeah. That's the impression I get. You kind of just go wherever you're told.
That's right. And so they put me on a 2.5-ton truck bouncing along the roads. The roads weren't really roads then. They were just rocky, paths, right? And we went to Chuncheon, stayed there for a couple of days, and then I went to Inje. And then I got that was a 3/4-ton truck. Each time the truck would get smaller. And then I stayed in Inje a few days. They put me on a Jeep and left me at a mountain pass with a few other soldiers. And we had to climb Soraksan Mountain. And the station I was in for a few months then was at the peak of Soraksan Mountain. It was a radio relay station. And our job was to relay messages from inland down to the coast.
So was that your concentration when you were training in California before you left? Or?
Yeah, I was a radio repairman, right. I had training in that before. I was a television repairman, so
it's natural placement for you, I guess.
Well, actually, they were going to make me the story behind that, it was funny. They were going to make me a pole lineman, climbing telephone poles to splice, cable splicer, to splice cables. But I had all this training and a diploma and a first-class radio telephone operator's license. So I went to the camp and I asked for something more suitable. Yeah. And they put me into radio repair.
What was your impression of what was going on, and what was like the media coverage like, and other people's impressions?
Well, I didn't think of it too much. I was busy water skiing in Florida.
Enjoying your youth?
Yeah, and just being young.
Yeah.
And I didn't think about it too much. I didn't look forward to being drafted, but I did what I was told. And now that's I didn't. We were told that it was a necessary United Nations endeavor to keep keep Korea from being communist, and I went along with that, but I didn't think too much about it.
Yeah, you said keep them from being communist. I guess so. I do my part, right?
Well, it seemed right, but you know, the thing that when I look back at the pictures, the ones that affect me most emotionally are the pictures where my buddies there were out of uniform, maybe drinking beer at a party or something like that. And then you could see they're not soldiers, they're 19, 20, 21-year-olds who don't even know what's going on. They're just there,
yeah.
you know.
Yeah, that's the impression I've gotten doing these interviews with a lot of veterans. A lot of times I ask them how they feel about going into the war and if they're afraid or timid or anything, and they're just all kind of, I guess, echoed the same sentiment, you know. I was young, stupid, didn't really know what was going on, just kind of followed my orders. And
yeah, that's what impresses me. You know, here's some young people who didn't really understand what was going on, and if there was combat, they would be the ones to go into combat. Our job was really to keep away from the officers. You know,
that's the scariest part.
Right, that was the scariest part.
Yeah.
And
you know they put you to work or something?
Well, yeah, they could tell you to do anything, and you had to do it. You know, if you had to be on guard duty or peel potatoes or whatever.
Yeah.
But in fact, that's the nice thing about being at the peak of Soroksan. You had to climb the last few miles up this path, and the officers didn't like to climb the path, so we never saw an officer up there.
So you're always volunteering. I'll go up the path.
Right. Yeah. After you were there a while, you liked it, you know, because you were away from the people who could cause you problems.
So when you're going, you know, to your station on that peak, I don't know, it's interesting to listen to you explain how you went from one place to the other. Was it, you know, did you have any sense of fear at all or anxiety as you were kind of getting maybe closer to the action or getting to wherever you were going to be posted? Or was it a sense of relief, like finally I'll be where I'll be for the next couple
Well, I came from New York City, you know, and I was used to big places where there were a lot of people. And the idea of going to this place where there was only maybe 7 or 8 of us, well, actually there were Korean soldiers there learning how to do that too. We were training the Koreans, you know, in the use of the radio equipment. But in fact, I have one slide of the Korean soldiers and American soldiers playing volleyball at the peak.
That's good training.
Yeah, let's see, what was the question?
Just I guess if you had any kind of anxiety.
Yeah, no, it's just that I wasn't used to that, yeah. to being that far from other people in cities, towns, yeah. And like hot showers. If you wanted a hot shower, you had to climb down the mountain, get a ride in a Jeep into the company area, take your shower, and then get a ride back out and climb back up the mountain. And that was rather unusual for me.
So, I mean, was it peaceful on the top of the peak?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes you woke up in the morning and you went outside the door and you were above the clouds. And there's a cliff right next to us, you know, but you got used to that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So when you were actually stationed there, was it after the ceasefire or?
Yeah, after the ceasefire.
So, I guess there wasn't as much of a, you know, a thought that there was this looming attack or anything like that. Yeah.
No, we didn't think about it, but we didn't hear of any sign of the ceasefire breaking down. I mean, we had the signs of the war were there. I remember taking a walk around the perimeter. You knew where the perimeter was because of the field wire that was stretched between little places where soldiers had dug in.
Yeah.
In fact, there's one picture of a skeleton that remained, one of the soldiers that they hadn't found.
An American soldier or Chinese?
From the sign, the helmet was a Korean American helmet, and it had a hole in the front of it. But so you could see the signs of it. We had a 50 caliber machine gun, you know, but there was no. But it was over, essentially.
That you were training?
Yeah, and they were like on one side of the peak, and we were on the other side of the peak.
So how was that, interacting with them?
We didn't interact too much at the peak. There was more down in the company area later on. I was only there for 3 or 4 months. Then we moved out of that, off there. I had other duties.
Yeah. But you got a chance to play volleyball with them.
Well, actually, the picture was not of me playing volleyball. That was a picture I got from somebody else, which was taken just before I got there. Yeah.
So,
yeah,
it seems just so interesting to me that, you know, because most of the interviews that we've done, the soldiers ship out immediately after the ceasefire. And so it's a different perspective that you might have on the country. You know, what was your impression of the country when you arrived and when you were stationed on the peak?
Well, the first impression, Busan was a large city, but it was just little hovels, you know, and shacks and all spread out. And then I took the train ride to Seoul. And I was very impressed. It was in the season where the rice crops were just starting to grow, and you had a vista of all these different colored patches, like a patchwork quilt, of the rice at different stages, and that was very beautiful.
Did the poverty strike you at all, or the fact that there are shacks mostly?
Yeah.
Especially coming from New York City, where you come from this big city.
Well, that was a big impression. There was poverty, and the village near the camp, when I came down off the peak, consisted of houses made of cardboard from military boxes, packing boxes, with straw roofs, and the villages always smelled because the sewage system was a trench down the middle of the village street. And
so, what were your thoughts? I mean, that's.
Pardon?
What were your thoughts when you saw that?
I was just taking it all in, and there were. But there's one picture I have that I thought was very significant. Here's this village consisting of people living in poverty, heating their house in the middle of the winter with a few pieces of wood, with a flue, and in a fire, the flue of which went under the floors, and they'd sleep on the floor. And yet there's, in the middle of the village, were flowers planted. There was a round, a stone, a base with dirt in it with colored flowers. And in other words, they took the time to do that, to add a little beauty to the place.
So, did you see this after you moved back to camp, coming down from the mountain?
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
And you said that you had more of an opportunity to interact with the Koreans once you were.
Yeah, when you were bored, you walk through the village. I found out in the Army you make friends in the motor pool, the truck drivers, because then you could always get some wheels.
Yeah, go wherever you want.
Right, and you could go somewhere. Yeah. So sometimes we would walk through the rice paddies to get to the village. Other times we would get a ride into the village, and we'd talk to the people there a little bit.
What was that like?
And there's also people in the camp. And I remember This is very significant in my life later on. I thought I couldn't learn a foreign language, but the Army gives you a little book with some Korean instructions in it, and I learned a little Korean, and then I would try it out. You know.
That's great.
안녕하십니까 or 안녕하세요, or
What does that mean?
that's a greeting.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Is peace with you? Or if I wanted to buy something, I knew how to say "Lumamnaka," and I discovered that it wasn't hard if I just got used to the fact that the verb was always at the end. It just sounded right that way, and I discovered that I could learn another language, and I ended up studying many languages after that.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, I had this one incident that was very significant. There was an older Korean worker in the camp, and he was very unfriendly. You know, he wouldn't talk with me. And then I said a few things to him in Korean, like, where do you live, and how are you? And he suddenly became very friendly.
Yeah.
And he started talking so fast in Korean, I couldn't understand what he was saying. Yeah, but I saw the difference that knowing a little of the language meant in terms of that I was interested in them.
Yeah, so I guess maybe originally the local Korean civilians might have maybe a little bit of fear of who are these soldiers stationed next to our camp, but then if you go out and you make the effort to interact with them, and they see, you know, they're just people.
Mm-hmm.
We can interact with each other. We can be friends.
Yeah. I think it was hesitancy. In all the time I was there, that's one impression I have. There were children I interacted with, and adults. I never saw any real friction between soldiers and Koreans,
Okay.
you know.
Did you notice that they were gracious at all? Did they understand what the war was all about and why the American soldiers were there in the country? Did you get a chance to?
Yeah, I didn't think about that too much. I think we were just all trying to do what we had to do, you know, at the time.
And were there other foreign troops from the United Nations?
I didn't see any.
No. Maybe they shipped out.
Probably after the fighting stopped, they went, and the remaining soldiers were American. I never saw any other soldiers from other countries.
And how long were you in the country after the ceasefire then?
14 months.
14?
Well,
That's a long time.
Yeah, I was there 14 months. Yeah, that was. You know, the one thing that impressed me though, and one reason I felt that there was something wrong in the war later in Vietnam was that in Vietnam, a lot of the local population was antagonistic toward the American soldiers. But in Korea, you never felt that. You always felt safe.
Maybe that's a good gauge to know whether or not a war is legitimate.
That might be. That's what bothered me about the Vietnam War. You know, when you got to Seoul, I think you had to be a little careful. You know, there was always what we called them the slicky boys, the kids who were trying to make a deal which is not financially to your advantage.
Yeah.
But that's life.
That's life.
Yeah.
You deal with it, I guess.
Yeah.
What was that like? Was it a relief to?
I was ready to go home. Yeah, and it's a long time to be away from home, and even though it was not uncomfortable, I wanted to go back.
What do you think the most difficult part of your 14 months there was, or the most challenging moment? Is there one moment that kind of stands out? You say, man, this is not what I want to be doing. This is hard.
Well, climbing the mountain for the first time, when you're not used to the altitude. But aside from that, oh, the cold. That's right. That I've forgotten about that. I've repressed it.
Try to get it out of your memory.
Yeah, because you had a. I remember getting frostbite on guard duty. My hands becoming numb. The cold. They did. I had my mother send me out some hand warmers.
Oh.
That was very good, so I could put them in my mittens. Because ordinarily you're in the inside in the cold weather, but if you had to stand guard duty, you had to stay for 3 hours out in the cold.
And so you were able to exchange letters and communication back home.
Yeah.
I guess. Well, that's nice that you were able to get the care packages.
Yeah, that was that. I think the Army overlooked that, the effect of the cold. I think I've been told by other Korean veterans, especially those who were combat veterans, that they all came back with the after effects of frostbite. Right now, in the winter, I go to Florida because I can't take the cold. I like to go running in the morning, and I have to put on 3 pair of mittens.
Well, that's like 6 months of the year at least.
Yeah, right. Yeah, in Syracuse, yes. Well, the most rewarding experience. Well, there was meeting the few people that you would meet. You know, you were on the Army base, and most Koreans couldn't speak English, so there wasn't too much room for communication. But I remember a few things, like there was this was in Seoul. There was one young boy who was an orphan, and he was at a Catholic mission, but he didn't like it there, so he would come around the base, and he would sleep in our sometimes in our Quonset hut with us. And it was really interesting to see him learning English, and he's probably a famous banker now, because I found out what he was doing.
Really?
Yeah, he'd come around and asked to change Korean money into American script, American money. Then the next day it would be American money into Korean money. And I was wondering why he needed to do all this changing. And then I realized what he was doing. Let's see, there's a word for it in banking terms. But every time he made the change, since the exchange rate was uneven, he was such a nice, friendly kid. You'd give him the benefit. Like if a certain amount of won came out to 92 cents, you'd give him $1. So every time he'd make a change, he'd end up with a little more money. And
Smart kid.
Yeah, he was smart. And that's why I said he probably became a banker later on, because he was learning English and learning how to be a business person.
And I'm sure the soldiers that were stationed there kind of liked hanging out with him because it was something different.
Yeah, it was nice to see him come around. He was friendly. We'd find him some blankets to sleep on. But there was another little girl. I have a picture of her in the camp near Inje. She would come around. Her mother worked in the wash tent, washing clothes, and she'd come in and to learn English. And I think she fixed on me. You know, she'd come into my tent to talk, and that's.
So maybe that's
that
where
nice.
Your love of languages started. I mean, not started, but maybe continued because you.
I could see people learning. You know, the other thing that I learned a lot that was important to me, that when I came home, I told my parents that I thought that there'd be a very rapid economic development in Korea. The reason is because even at the end of the fighting, when in the middle of the poverty, a large percentage of the population was literate. Because of the ease of learning to read the Korean alphabet, that and the strength, the desire for education, I thought that made a big difference. That would make a big difference in Korea, the high literacy rate and the desire for education.
Well, you predicted correctly.
Yeah, I saw that, and I was just a 21-year-old, but I could see that that was
happening.
Yeah, I had the intuition that that would happen. Yeah.
Well, just talking to some of my colleagues today, I mean, apparently Korea was one of the 20 poorest countries before the war. Now it's top 20 economies. So. Yeah,
and the first thing they did when the fighting started, I have some pictures of one of the newly built Korean schools. They started building schools.
Did the American soldiers participate in any of reconstruction or anything like that?
Well, the engineers were constantly rebuilding the bridges, which would go out every time there was a flood season. Oh, I have pictures of that too. They weren't built high enough or strong enough. So there was, and I think that they did help out in the building of the schools, but I'm not positive about that.
All right, so let's talk about you coming home. What was that like? You were happy to come home. What did you do after? Were you dispatched when you came home, or?
Yeah, I was discharged, and I signed up to go to college. I had never thought about going to college before. I was tired of school after high school, and then you had the GI Bill, but it wasn't just the availability of a free education. It was that when I saw what was going on in the world, and I wanted to find out more about it.
So
it really stimulated. I couldn't wait to start college. Yeah. It was a big difference from 2 years before when I couldn't stand another day of school.
So maybe that's probably one of the biggest impacts that your experience had. It gave you an appetite to learn.
It did. It was very, very strong. Yeah. I couldn't wait. Yeah.
So you started pursuing languages and.
Yeah, I've studied Spanish, Russian, Swedish, German.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, that's great that you discovered, a passion.
Yeah, from somebody who had changed my high school curriculum from an academic curriculum to a technical curriculum, electricity and radio, in order to avoid studying a foreign language.
And now you're all about the foreign language.
So the Korean language and my experience in Korea just changed that entirely.
That's great.
It made me more interested in our military adventures and keeping peace in the world, and social issues. And like there's little things, like, for example, I was looking at the pictures. See, the last few months, I was assigned to a school to train forward air controllers. Forward air controllers are important because they would go out. These were the ground-based ones, not the flying ones. You take a Jeep with radio equipment and you'd go out and mark a target. And you'd be there to spot the target and make sure those are the people that the airplanes really wanted to kill, not the wrong people. And you'd be in contact with the aircraft, the fighter bombers. And we had training exercises. And then when I hear about like drone aircraft killing people from a high altitude that they really couldn't identify, that bothers me, because my insight from my experience in Korea was that you don't do that. You have somebody there who marks the target, make sure they're enemy combatants, and not civilians.
Well, I guess
Yeah, I'm very, as an engineer, you know, a part engineer, communications engineer, I'm suspicious of the claim that you could read a penny from a drone video camera. That might be in very clear, still days, but I'm sure that, well, the fact that they don't go up in bad weather means that you can't always do that. The images in most days are probably blurry. You know, if there's any fighting around, there's smoke, you know, and so. But those are the things that my experience is. I also, like, I went to see this fellow who wrote 3 Cups of Tea, and who was advocating building schools.
in Afghanistan.
Yeah, and I think I saw that I think that's very important. I saw the importance of education, and educating girls, for example, and those are insights I got from being there.
So that's interesting that you mentioned that, because I guess one of the untold stories that the American military does now is also they do help build schools and infrastructure. Do you think it's their role to participate in that?
Somebody has to build them,
Yeah.
and I suppose that in some countries you might want to have the local people build it, because they'll build it to the standards that, and it gets employment to local people.
Showing that they've developed their country.
Yeah, though there's nothing wrong with military helping. I mean, these are just engineers.
All right. So let's see now.
Well, I went to undergraduate school. That was engineering school, and then I got married just after graduating.
And did you have a chance to share your stories with your wife?
To what?
To share your stories with your wife and family?
Yeah. Well, I had a lot of pictures, and I did share stories with my wife.
You have the pictures digitized, so.
Yeah, well, I had slides in those days,
Uh-huh.
and my slides run into the slides of the family.
Right. So, what are your thoughts about Korea nowadays? You know, obviously, as you mentioned, it's a powerful economy, it's very developed, and this is in stark contrast to North Korea, which many people know that it's not developed at all. How do you feel about the division between the two countries now?
I don't think it can last. I think it has to, eventually it'll be unified, if not my lifetime, in your lifetime. The way I happen to have made some Korean friends recently, people here studying at the university and their wives. My wife now was teaching English to a couple of Korean wives, and we socialized with the families. And these people had been into North Korea, so I was interested in what their impressions were. And the way that you can keep the North Koreans in power, living under those conditions, is to eliminate information about the rest of the world, to control their information. And I don't think that could happen. Yeah.
You don't think it should happen, or you think?
I don't think it could.
The government actually maintains that.
Yeah, I don't think they can maintain it. The communication is too omnipresent. You know, there'll be young people who will be able to get on the internet and smuggle videos, and when that happens, then there'll be a cry for change.
Well, hopefully the people won't be shot down, or maybe the government will respond. Do you see this unification being, is it possible it's a peaceful process?
Is it what?
Do you think it's possible that unification, when it does happen, is a peaceful process?
Yeah, excuse me for not hearing you. I have some tinnitus that started on the rifle range, actually. So.
I should speak up.
Yeah, no, that's okay. That it'll be a peaceful process. I can't predict how it'll happen. It'll have to happen inside of North Korea. I can't see, with nuclear arms on both sides, I can't see a full-scale war. It would be too devastating. So I don't know. It's just like in the Middle East. Each country is a little different, depending on the army, for example. There's a lot of people. I was told that a lot of the government people in the north do go to the south, and they know what's going on. So you can never tell when those people who have some significant power in the north will help, bring about a change.
So what do you think about America's role in all of this then? Should it be a facilitator of peace and reunification, or obviously it's a strong ally of South Korea and is very antagonistic towards North Korea in many ways?
Well, I think the American government would like to see a unification. I don't have any bad feelings about our participation in the Korean War. I see that maybe I can't predict how things what would have happened had had things went different. If things were different, if the UN and the American soldiers didn't come in to help, if General MacArthur didn't have such a big ego and try to get so close to the Chinese to bring the Chinese in. There are a number of mistakes that were made signaling to the North Koreans that the Americans wouldn't come in, which led them to think that they could invade the South and without repercussions. There were a lot of mistakes that were made, but we're all human. We make mistakes,
So, thinking, over the past 60 years, do you ever think about your experience? How often do you reflect on your time over there?
Very often, and as I mentioned before, I'm going back in June, and I think that I've been putting that off for a long time. And as I look at the pictures, I know the city, Seoul and Shinshan are going to be entirely different. I won't recognize them. But I want to go. The ceremonies that the Korean government has for us returning veterans will be more on the west. But I want to go to the east, near Inje and Soraksan National Park.
Where you were?
Yeah, where I was, because the mountains don't change.
Right, landscape stays the same.
That's right. I'm going to take those pictures and try to find the places where I was then.
That's what I was just going to suggest. That would be great.
Yeah, I'd like
to bring back some memories, I bet.
Yeah.
And that's in June, right?
That's in June, yeah.
Maybe.
Well, they seem to have been forgotten. People think in terms of World War II veterans and Vietnam veterans, but the Korean War veterans, it didn't seem to have been a war in the American consciousness. And I feel a little bad about that, but
how does that make you feel? I mean, it's a war. It was a war.
It was a war. A lot of people got killed and came back with injuries, and it was a war. But that's not important. We had the GI Bill for those that survived, and the veterans weren't treated badly.
Why do you think it was considered is forgotten?
I don't know. I really don't know. Maybe at that time, the war in the American consciousness was World War II. You know, I lived through, as a young teenager, through World War II, and that was such a major, that had such a major impact on the American consciousness that the fighting in Korea was small compared to that. There were no sacrifices being made.
But there were. There were American soldiers that were.
The soldiers, but the American population in general.
That's right.
If you didn't have a son, mostly it was sons, maybe there were some daughters, going over there, it didn't
really affect you.
It didn't affect you, no. In the World War II, there were no more cars all the factories were being made, all the factories were producing tanks and weapons of war, but that didn't happen during the Korean War.
And the media wasn't covering it.
No, it wasn't, not to the extent of World War II.
Okay, so...
Well, maybe I think that, for example, my granddaughter who was born in Korea, that there should be some memories of what people went through during the Korean War and actually in the war before. I mean, things were pretty bad in Korea, even before the war, during the Second World War. And maybe when Korea becomes unified and the Korean people could put their attention outside of their own country, maybe they could try to be a means or a tool for peace in the world in other countries.
So we need to educate the people.
Yeah, they could see the role education had. Yeah, in their country, maybe they could reach out to other countries where there are similar problems, where poverty is holding people back and war is threatening.
Well, Mr. Rothenberg, I appreciate you coming and sitting with us.
Yeah, that was nice.
As a token of appreciation, we have a medal for you that's actually from the government of the Republic of Korea. It's the Ambassador for Peace Medal from the Ministry of Patriots and Veteran Affairs, as well as the Korean Veterans Association. And they have this medal for you, and if you don't mind, I'd like to place it around your neck.
Sure. That's quite a medal.
Wow.
You like that, Rachel?
You did a good
The medal I'm
service.
getting?
There you go. And then told it says Korean War Veterans Honor. So again, thank you very much for coming.
You're welcome.